Last week we looked at the prophecy of the 70 weeks. And I just want to emphasize again, it's not 70 years. There are two periods that's kind of confused. I mean, even when I was going through the first time when I was doing this prophecy many years ago as a young Christian, the two time periods kind of got overlapped in my mind and caused me a little confusion because the 70 years it has to do with the old Israel. It's the time that they were captives in Babylon. The 70 weeks is really 490 years. And that is the time that God gave to the Jewish nation. And during that time, he would continue to work with the Jewish nation, and they would still be his chosen people in a sense. And he would work to accomplish his purposes through the Jewish nation for 490 years, which works out to 70 weeks in prophetic time. That's what we looked at last week. And we saw that there are two main interpretations of this prophecy among Christians. At least I know of two. I don't know. I mean, among evangelicals, there is the rapture theory. And we looked at that last week, where they believe that 69 weeks was given to the Jewish nation, 483 years. Then Jesus came and died. And the last week out of the 70, God postponed it. God put a gap between week 69 and week 70. And that gap has continued for nearly 2,000 years. And they believe that God has one more week or 7 more years when he's going to treat the Jews as his special people. That's the belief in the evangelical world. So for 69 weeks, 483 years, the Jews continued to be God's special people. Then he stopped dealing with them. And he went to the time of the Gentiles. And he's dealing with the Gentiles now for nearly 2,000 years. And then afterwards, he'll be finished with the Gentiles. The Gentile church will be raptured away. And he'll go back to dealing with the Jews. It's an interesting way of approaching the prophecy. But you also have to ask a question when you look at the prophecies. You have to ask the question, do you really understand God's purposes, and does this make sense? Like, for example, God stops dealing with the Jews. We are no longer under the law, we are under grace. The old covenant is gone. And then for 2,000 years, you are dealing with the new covenant, and you have turned away from the way of the law. And then for 7 more years, you go back to the way of the law, you go back to the old covenant, you go back to the Jews. And, from my perspective, it makes absolutely no sense at all. Like God is confused in the way he does things. But anyway, we looked at this, and I don't want to dwell on it too much because sometimes it's not good to put false ideas in your head. But I just want us to understand, because the next time you come upon the rapture theory, or you hear people talking about Daniel's 70 weeks, or they talk about the gap in the gap theory. This is the gap theory. 69 weeks plus a gap, then 1 week. But the other interpretation, which makes, as a matter of fact, let me see if I can bring up a diagram, because there's something I didn't mention last week that I should highlight. Or I did mention it, but I didn't emphasize it as much as I probably just mentioned it this week, because what I want to do before I go any further is kind of just clean up the loose ends. So I want to look at the diagram again that we looked at last week. Give me just a second. We looked at this diagram last week, but if you look at this diagram, you'll notice that the you'll notice that we have a series of arcs at the top, a series of semicircles. Go down to the lowest level, and you'll see 7 weeks, then 62 weeks, and then 1 week. That is the 70 weeks. And you'll see the next arc above it says 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. And then the largest arc at the top, it says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. This is unapologetically, this is a Seventh-day Adventist interpretation. So what Adventists do, and to be honest, I'm not claiming to have all information. I'm not claiming to have all knowledge, but based on my understanding and my study of the book of Daniel, I am agreeing with the Seventh-day Adventist interpretation in as much as the time periods are concerned. When it comes to the end of the 2,300 days, what happened? Well, we can discuss that. I might have a little disagreement, but basically I agree with the time periods and how it's worked out. So what we looked at last week was that the 70 weeks is a subsection of the 2,300 days. So when God came to Daniel, when the angel came to Daniel and began to explain to Daniel about the 2,300 days, Daniel became sick. And some years later, the angel comes back and he says, consider the vision. And he says, now 70 weeks are cut off. And so this cutoff period is from the 2,300 days prophecy. Now, this would be helpful because it tells you, when do you begin the 2,300 days prophecy? Well, we are not told, but we are told when the 70 weeks begin, from the commandment to restore and to rebuild Jerusalem. So that is when the overall time period would begin. And then it tells you what happens in the first 70 weeks, which was fulfilled. Jesus came after 69 weeks. And then in the final 7 years, you had God continuing to deal with the Jewish nation until finally their time was over. And the Jews no longer had a part in God's special purposes for the world. Their time is over. They have no 1 week coming down at the end of time. They have no 7 years in the future. The only Jews who will be involved in a future 7-year event are the spiritual Jews, those who are Jews in spirit and not in the flesh. That is God's people, the 144,000. We have an involvement in the last moments of time, but not the physical Jews. I mean, of course, many Jews will come into the message in the end of time, but they will come in as Christians, not as Jews. God's time with the old covenant, God's time with the system of the law, God's time with the physical system is over, and it's over forever. God is not confused. The age of the old covenant had its purpose, and it fulfilled the purpose, and it's over with and done. So the point I want to make, though, is that the 2,300 days, it takes us to the year 1844. And what is the significance of the year 1844? Those of us who have been together, we have been together through the book of Revelation, and we see that in Revelation chapter 4, it shows you the beginning of a judgment. Same thing that we see in Daniel chapter 7. In fact, let me see if I can bring up another diagram. Do I have it here? I don't have it here. All right, I'm going to pass it up for the moment because I don't want to take the time to go and search for that diagram. What I'm really wanting to look for, there is a chart that I used a couple of weeks ago where I showed you the comparison between Daniel 2, 7, 8, and 9. But if you go back to that chart and you look at where it says in Daniel chapter 7, it says the judgment was set and the books were open. If you move across in a timeline over to Daniel chapter 8, you will see where the corresponding event is: the sanctuary restored. What I mean is, right across the prophecies, you can see events that correspond. At the top, you have the head of gold, and you have the lion. You know what? I think I'm going to have to just, if you give me a moment, let me look for that diagram, because I hate to be just speaking in a vacuum and I'm leaving you all behind. I don't want to do that. So let me find the diagram very quickly. It seems I don't even have it where I thought I had it. Give me a second, folks, and pardon my. I didn't intend to mention this evening, so I'm kind of playing it by ear. And what I realize is I don't have the diagram where I thought I had it. Okay, yes, okay, I got it. I got it. All right, so all right, this is the diagram. I need to move you again, guys. All right, here's the diagram. I think I can. Okay, can you see my spotlight? Can you see a little red thing moving? All right, praise the Lord. Okay, so if you look at the top, you find Babylon corresponds to the lion. You go to the second level, you find Medo Persia. The breast and the arms of silver corresponds to the bear, corresponds to the ram. The belly and the thighs of brass corresponds to the leopard, corresponds to the he goat, plus the horn, plus the other four horns. You go down to the other section, Rome, the legs and the feet, and you see it corresponds to the great and terrible beast, plus the 10 horns, plus the little horn. And over in chapter 8, it goes to the exceedingly great horn. What this diagram shows you is that the prophecies line up, they correspond to each other. You come down to where it talks about the judgment sits. Look at Daniel chapter 7. Look in the second column. The judgment sits, all right? It says in Daniel chapter 7, the judgment was set and the books were open. If you go to Daniel chapter 2 and you look at what corresponds, you'll see the corresponding event is that a stone was cut out of a mountain without hands. This corresponds to the judgment sitting. And if you go to Daniel chapter 8, it corresponds to the sanctuary was cleansed. So when does the judgment sit? You don't get a date, but if you go over to Daniel 8, you will see it says, under 2,300 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed. So by looking at the parallel event on the timeline, you can see that the judgment corresponds to the sanctuary being cleansed. So you can give a date to the judgment. You can say, okay, if the sanctuary being cleansed was in 1844, then it corresponds to, or the sanctuary being restored. The word cleanses here, but I far prefer the word restored. The sanctuary being restored corresponds to the judgment sitting. So you can say, well, then the judgment, the sitting of the judgment should have begun about 1844 based on lining up the different elements of the prophecy. I hope that is not too hard to understand. I hope you all followed what I was trying to say. All right, so this is why when you go to Revelation chapter 4 and we look at the beginning of that judgment in Revelation 4, somebody asked me more than once. I don't usually put a date on it, but somebody asked me, when do you think this begins? And I would say, well, I think based on Daniel, I would say to sometime around 1844 in that region. So if somebody asks me when the pre-Advent judgment begins, I will say around about 1844. People ask me, is that when the Day of Atonement begins? I know Adventists teach that the Day of Atonement began in 1844. That is where I don't agree. I don't think the Day of Atonement and the judgment is the same thing. I think the judgment takes place before the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement is not a 177-year event. 1844 till today is 177 years roundabout. The Day of Atonement is not an event that takes so long. So anyway, that is what I wanted to clear up from last week's study. Those are some of the loose ends I wanted to clear up. But this week we're going to move on then. And there's one other thing. There's one other thing that I want to look at. It's in Daniel chapter 9, but it's in several other places. But I think I need to point it out. So let's go to the Bible. In the last part of Daniel 9, let's look at something that is said here. It says in verse 27. I want to point out some elements in this verse that I want you to take note of. He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Look at what it says. In the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice. Notice the word sacrifice. He shall cause the sacrifice and the offering, the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. I want you to look at these 3 words. Sacrifice, abominations, and desolate. Why am I pointing this out? There is a statement that Jesus made. Very, very fascinating statement. Let me see. It's in Matthew chapter 24, is it? Let me find it quickly. I think it's Matthew 24. It's also Matthew 24, yes. All right, Matthew 24, and look at what it says here. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Now I would like an answer from somebody. I'm giving you an invitation to please unmute your mic and answer the question. Which event is this speaking about? Anybody?
Destruction of Jerusalem.
Thank you, Brother Ian. This is the event that took place in AD 70, about 37 years after Jesus went back to heaven. This was the destruction of Jerusalem. And Jesus refers to something that he calls the abomination of desolation. And it was spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Jesus says, when you see it standing in the holy place, but he adds something. He says, whoso readeth, let him understand. And what he's saying is that when you read about this abomination of desolation, it's not going to be something simple to understand. So Jesus made a little comment that, look here, when you are reading the book of Daniel, you need understanding. So you are going to see this thing called the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, and he says, at that time, let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. So as Brother Ian says, you can't mistake that there is a meaning here, what I would call a primary meaning, which was to the Jews of that day. Jesus was talking to them, and in a special way, he was talking to his disciples, and he was saying, when you see this thing that Daniel spoke about, standing in the holy place, then any of you who is in Judea, run for the hills. That's very clear and very simple. And we understand that the Christians who were in Jerusalem in AD 70, they saw this abomination of desolation. It first of all came upon the city, and then it withdrew, and they headed for the hills, they ran for the hills. And so when the destruction came back, when it came and for the actual destruction, no Christian was caught in that disaster. So why am I bringing this in? Because I want you to consider, what is this abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke about? Now, the prophecy that tells you about the destruction of Jerusalem, there's only one such prophecy in the book of Daniel, and it's right here in the 70-week prophecy. It's what we just looked at. It says, He, Jesus, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And as we pointed out, for 7 years, there was a special relationship with the Jews. It was propagated for seven years during the time of Jesus and for some years afterwards, because the gospel message, in a peculiar way, it was carried only to the Jews. It was afterwards, when Peter got his vision, that it went to the Gentiles. But it said, in the midst of the week, in the midst of that 1 week, although God is dealing with the Jews for 7 years, in the midst of that 7 years, He puts an end to the old system. The sacrifice and the oblation cease. The old system, God puts an end to it. He's done with it. The veil of the temple is ripped in two. God has nothing more to do with the sacrifices and the ceremonials and the worship system of Israel and the old covenant. But then he goes on to talk now about what will happen to Jerusalem. He says, for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. What does a consummation mean? It means the complete destruction. Something is completely eaten up. It is consumed. Jerusalem was to be completely consumed. And God says, even until this complete consummation, and the thing that has been determined, what has been decreed, what has been prophesied, shall be poured upon the desolate. So you might ask the question, who or what is this desolate? Sometimes you just have to take the words one at a time and break them down. You go to Matthew 23, and you see where Jesus says, he talks about Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and you would not. Behold, your house is left unto you, what? Desolate. It's not an accidental word. It says in Daniel, that which is determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Maybe Jesus is pointing our attention to Daniel's prophecy. Maybe not. But he says, your house is left unto you desolate. So we don't need to question, what is the desolate? It's Jerusalem. It's Judea. It's the Jewish nation. And in Daniel it says, what has been determined shall be poured upon the desolate one. But what happens before that? For the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. When Jesus left, he says, your house is left unto you desolate. That was 37 years before Jerusalem was actually destroyed. And during those 37 years, what was happening? It says there would be the overspreading of abominations. So Jerusalem would continue to become more and more abominable. And why would this happen? Because the Spirit of God had departed from Jerusalem. When they rejected Jesus, God's Spirit was no longer pleading with the Jews as God's special people. Maybe there were little individual people who were still receiving grace, but the nation as a whole, as one author puts it, the angel of mercy had departed from Jerusalem. Now, it also mentions sacrifice. I want to mention these three words because we're going to look at them again. Sacrifice, abominations, and desolate. So when Jesus spoke about this, he says, in the verse we looked at just a little before in chapter 24, he says, come on. Okay, Matthew 24 and verse 15, he says, now, when you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So he's telling the Jews, he's telling the Christians, go back and study the book of Daniel. And when you see what Daniel spoke about, standing in the holy place, then you must run for the hills, head for the hills. Before I go any further, I just want to say most of us understand that this event is to have another fulfillment in the end of time. And I hear people ask about this all the time. But I want you to notice something. Remember that when you have an event and it is repeated, most of the time it's not a carbon copy of the first event. There are differences. And maybe I should just spend this evening looking at those differences and showing you why the same advice does not necessarily apply in the same way. Let me look for one other verse to just give you one other point before I move on. This is in Luke, but let me give you the exact verse. It's easier for me to just look it up than to go. All right, it's easier for me to do a fast check. Let me see. It's Luke 21:20. Yeah, Luke 21:20. All right. Here's what it says. And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. Just something I'm going to put the other verse. Let me put it on the left panel because I want to do a comparison here, just to make a little point. All right, the point I want to make is that you look at two chapters, two different records of the same thing. And this is one of the reasons why I want to emphasize that the words of the Bible, they are not, I don't think the Bible is verbally inspired. I don't know what anybody else believes, but I'm telling you that I once believed this, and I don't believe this when you look at these statements, because when you look at these two statements by two different writers, this is by Matthew and this is by Luke. And Luke is telling the story the way it has been told to him, because Luke was not there. Luke was a Gentile. And somebody told Luke the story and he recorded it. He was a historian. Matthew, of course, was one of the disciples. He was probably there. But Matthew says that Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation. But the way Luke heard the story from somebody who was there was, when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies. It doesn't mention abomination of desolation in Luke. And if you ask me why, let me tell you how I would understand. I would think that Jesus said both things. Jesus says, when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then we know that the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet is standing in the holy place. So I've made a long sentence out of both things. Matthew records the part that stands out in his mind. Luke records the part that stands out in somebody else's mind. Both things together give you a more complete picture. They're not contradicting each other. Each of them is reporting what he knows of what was said. You put both things together, you get a complete picture. So Jesus says, when you therefore shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then you can know that the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet is standing in the holy place. And you get a complete picture. So the abomination of desolation, as it applied to the Jewish nation, was really Jerusalem surrounded by armies. That is the abomination of desolation as far as Jerusalem was concerned. And the both of them say, what Luke says is that when you see that happen, then you know that the desolation or the destruction of Jerusalem is at hand. And both of them say, all right, those who are in Judea must run for the hills. Matthew says the same thing. Luke says the same thing. And Luke actually adds something else that Matthew didn't remember. Jesus gave some more details, and he says, Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. In other words, you must move fast. As soon as the armies that surrounded Jerusalem pull back, you have to run for you have to get out fast. You hardly have any time to do anything. So this was to tell them how urgent it was. Now, what I wanted to say was, many people today are asking the same question: what will be the sign to run for the hills? And I'm going to say something to you. Um, one of the things we have looked at very closely in this room, we have looked at the difference between type and antitype. We have looked at the difference between Old Testament fulfillment and New Testament fulfillment. What happened in the destruction of Jerusalem? It was something that happened during New Testament times, but it was an event that was a type that has a greater antitype. Remember, in the time of Jerusalem's destruction, all of God's people were gathered. Those to whom it mattered, they were gathered in one location in one particular city. And what was coming upon them was a physical destruction. So Jesus' counsel to the Christians to get out and head for the hills was in the context of a massacre that was about to take place of the Jewish nation. In these days, is it the same situation? Are God's people all gathered together in cities, and is there to be a sign of armies surrounding these cities to tell them that they must head for the hills? I think you can answer that for yourself. If we look at it in this way, I think we are misunderstanding the type and the antitype. We don't have God's people in one location, and we don't have a physical army surrounding the city to destroy everybody inside the city. As a matter of fact, my understanding of it is that I'm going to show you three elements that existed in the days of the destruction of Jerusalem, and I'm going to show you how I understand it to apply in the end times. We have looked at this before, but it won't do any harm to do a little revision, will it? There were three powers, or three elements present when Jerusalem was destroyed. Three primary agencies. Number one, there was the people of God, right? There was a church of Jesus Christ. They were there. Number two, there was the great false church that claimed to be God's church, but it wasn't. That was the Jewish nation. Number three, there was the army of the beast. There was the power of the beast. There was Rome, the Roman army, standing at the gates, ready to destroy. They were ready to destroy both the false church and the true church. Those are the three powers. When you come down to the end of time, we look at the three agencies. The beast is one. Number two is the great false church, or the false system of religion. And number three is the people of God. The same elements are there. Now the beast, again, is about to destroy the false woman. And we see that happening in Revelation 17. The beast is surrounding the false woman. What this means, in my understanding, what I see, is that the forces of paganism and atheism are gathering and squeezing in to destroy religion. They are out to destroy Babylon. And it's going to happen. We see it happening in Revelation 17. But where are God's people? Many of them are in Babylon, right? Many of them are in Babylon, just like many of God's people were in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the Babylon of that day. Jerusalem was a great false religious system of that day. Jerusalem was the Babylon of that day. And God said to his people, come out of her, my people. Because if you don't get out, when you see this abomination of desolation, you shall receive of her plagues. They would have been destroyed in Jerusalem.
Brother David.
Yes, Brother Ray.
So this means that it's the beast of the bottomless pit of no return. It destroys everything, and it's just one power that's totally against both false religion and true religion. Am I correct?
Absolutely. There is another element, because just like the Jews of that day were against the Christian church, you also have that in the present day, because Babylon is against the true people of God today. And from time to time they will persecute them a little bit, just like the Jews were persecuting the Christians. But the great destroying element is the beast, Rome. So how do we apply this in our day? In our day, the beast is going to destroy Babylon, but God's people are in Babylon, and that is why when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, let us make note of this. What did it mean in the days of the Jews? It meant that the armies of Rome placed their banners in the holy ground outside Jerusalem. When you saw Jerusalem surrounded with armies, the forces of the devil were standing where they should not stand. They were not supposed to stand in the religious ground. Now, even though Babylon is apostate religion, it still goes by the name of Christ and of God. When you see the forces of the devil standing in Babylon, taking up their position, God's people in Babylon should know this is the final chance. All those who are saying stand with the ship, and all those who are saying that, you know, let God take care of it himself or whatever, all those who are confused and who stay with Babylon, the overwhelming destruction that is about to take place, they will be caught up in it. God puts it this way: lest you be partakers of her sins and you receive of her plagues. So what I'm saying, you can see, brothers and sisters, that it's a very clear parallel, but the elements are different. When you got out of the first Babylon, Jerusalem, you headed for the hills. But when you got out of the second Babylon, what kind of situation is it? Is it a question of physical destruction? Why do you get out of Babylon? Because Babylon has become so infected with evil principles and satanic activities that if you stay there, your soul will be destroyed. You get out of Babylon. In other words, what I'm saying, it's not so much a physical escape as a spiritual escape. That's the point I'm making. Those people who think they should head for the hills, please head for the hills, but don't say it is in response to the prophecy. It's good for you to go to the hills. It's good for you to go to the country and set up country living if you can. Fine, there's nothing wrong with this. There's a lot good with this. But don't say that this prophecy gives you the mandate and is commanding you to do it, because I could not interpret this prophecy this way, if you understand what I'm saying. Because the prophecy, as it applies in our time, the abomination of desolation, is not focusing on physical destruction. It's focusing more on spiritual destruction. So I hope that point is easy to understand. Now I'm going to go back to Daniel chapter 9. Maybe not even Daniel chapter 9, but back to the book of Daniel. This phrase here, the abomination that makes desolate, it comes up 3 other times in the book of Daniel. But each time it comes up, it is phrased a little differently. Now, let me see if I can bring up some of the other places. Let me start with Daniel 8.
Brother David,
Yes, Brother Peter.
just before you go on to that, would it be correct to say then that the system, the mark of a beast system that will be coming, it will be a spiritual thing instead of a physical thing?
Well, it I would say both things are right. Both things are right. I mean, absolutely, it has to be spiritual, but there are some physical elements that we can't get away from. If we say these elements are not physical, then we don't know how to define the crisis. So where I would say it is spiritual is that if you look at the mark of the beast in ancient Babylon, all right, there was an image made of the beast. The beast in this case was Babylon, and the image was the image that Nebuchadnezzar set up on the plain of Dura. So they were to bow to this image, and it was a physical bowing. And all they had to do was not bow or bow. That's all they had to do. They had to go down upon their knees, right, and fall on their faces. It was simple as that. It has nothing to do with what was in their heart. But if you look at the end time issue, it cannot be simply so. Nobody is being asked to bow to a literal image. The image itself is not literal. So it must be a spiritual commitment. It must be a heart loyalty that is demonstrated. But at the same time, how do you demonstrate this loyalty? I can't get away from the idea that it has to be by some outward demonstration that you show this heart loyalty. Because
Correct.
otherwise, how can it be that people are forbidden to buy and sell unless there's some outward way of identifying people? So I agree that it's spiritual, but I also believe there has to be that physical component. There has to be some way of demonstrating people's position, because that's the whole point of the crisis. It's a crisis that is to test everybody on the earth and to divide them into two camps. So there has to be some way of making that distinction. So that physical component has to be there, is what I'm saying.
David, can I say something, please?
Sure, Brother Ray.
Yeah. So yeah, because you're right. Because the physical has to be there and the spiritual. Now, just to illustrate something, what I'm trying to explain that way, there's no confusion. I was speaking to a female a little bit ago. I'll make it real short. And this person was telling me, I was asking her, so do you think that everybody should do exactly what the government says? You know, when other people do not agree with whatever, I'm not going to mention what it is. And she says, yes. So she said, well, do you think that those that agree with the government should then annihilate or isolate those that do not agree? She said, yes. So I believe that this is something that's going to be willingly enforced. In other words, people are going to agree with the government so hard, not knowing that what they are doing is exactly that, what you just mentioned, the physical part of receiving that mark, because they are convinced by heart, they're not forced.
Okay, I don't quite get the point, but I agree that there
Well, you
has.
explained it the other day, David. You explained it the other day. Maybe I'm not explaining it clearly enough. You explained that the mark of the beast has to do with something that people will embrace willingly.
Yes, right. That is what I absolutely believe. I don't believe anybody can receive the mark of the beast accidentally or ignorantly, because if that happens, then it's a complete rejection of the main point of the crisis. God says in Revelation 3 and verse 10 that the hour of temptation will come upon all that dwell upon the earth to try them that dwell upon the earth. You can't test somebody on a spiritual issue unless the person is conscious of what he's doing, unless the person is aware of making a choice. So I absolutely that's what I believe. Anyway, I want to look at these other references where the Bible mentions the abomination of desolation. And it's interesting. If nothing else, it is interesting because the same phrase comes up about 4 different times, and the terminology is different. But all right, let's go to Daniel 8 in the right panel. Look at what it says. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning, look what it says, the daily sacrifice, there's that word again, and the transgression of desolation, there's that phrase again. It's a little different this time. Over here in Daniel 9, it says abominations. Over here, it says transgression. In Daniel 9, it says desolate. In Daniel 8, it says desolation. In Daniel 9, it says the sacrifice and the oblation. In Daniel chapter 8, it says the daily, and the word sacrifice is supplied. But anyway, what I'm pointing out is that the three elements are there: something relating to sacrifice, something relating to desolation, and something relating to abomination or transgression. Now, this prophecy in Daniel 8 is referring to the time of the Dark Ages. Remember, it was during the Dark Ages that the sanctuary was cast down, that the work of Christ, I mean, this is how we interpret it. This is how I interpreted it when we were going through this a couple of weeks ago. The work of Jesus Christ was obscured. It was put out of the way by the papal system. And so you have another interpretation here of the daily sacrifice and it doesn't say abomination, it says transgression of desolation. But all of this was taken away. And it refers to another time when the people of God should recognize something evil was happening within the system of the Christian church, and they were to get out of it. And so during the Dark Ages, when these abominations were coming in, God's people who were within the system of the Roman Catholic Church, they were leaving it. That is where you had the Reformation. They came out of in another incarnation, if you want to put it that way. They came out of Babylon. They came out of that system. And what I wanted to point out is that in the book of Daniel, this abomination of desolation is mentioned 4 different places, and each time you can see that it has a different application. One of them applies to our day, to our time. If you look at Daniel 12 and verse 11, let's go to Daniel 12 and verse 11. Look at what it says here. And I believe this is the time that applies to our time. Look at what it says. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. This is a prophecy that applies to the very end of time. I don't think I have to prove this to anybody, but when we come to Daniel chapter 12, I think I'll be able to demonstrate that very clearly. I'll just tell you one thing about Daniel 12. All right? I'll just remind us about something that we looked at over the past couple of weeks. Remember, one of the things that we looked at was that the different prophecies in Daniel, the different chapters, each of them looks at the history from a different perspective. So we say that Daniel chapter 2 was looking at history from a geographic or a physical perspective. It was looking at the kingdoms of God from the perspective of geology, if you want to put it that way: gold, silver, brass, iron, and stone. And we said it was referring to the geographic location of the kingdom. Daniel chapter 7 is looking at the political side of the kingdom, so that at the end, the 5th kingdom, the king takes authority, the restoration of the king. Daniel 8, we said, was looking at the religious kingdom, the restoration of the religious kingdom, the geographic, the political, and now the religious. And all of these prophecies use symbols in relation to what the chapter is focusing on. So the Daniel 2 use metals from the earth. It's talking about the geographic location. Daniel chapter 1, it uses wild beasts, and then it shows you Christ as king number 5. Daniel chapter 8, talking about religion, it uses sanctuary animals. And somebody even suggested something about the horn that I need to examine more closely. But it deals with the religion. All of them, 2, 7, and 8, they use symbols. Now I'm going to say something about the next prophecy. We haven't gone there yet, but I'm going to say something about it. Daniel chapter 11 and 12 is very different. What is different about the prophecy of chapter 12 and 11? And I'll tell you what the difference is. It uses no symbols. What do I mean? Well, the first prophecy uses a symbol of an image. The second prophecy uses a symbol of 4 wild beasts. The third prophecy uses a symbol of 2 sanctuary animals and horns. Go to the fourth chapter, the fourth prophecy. Do you see any animals? Do you see any images? Do you see any horns? No. What you have is real-time description of people. The king does this and that king does that, and he sends his daughter, and they make a covenant, and then this one, and then this king is destroyed, and so forth. It talks about real time. And I believe this is a massive clue. I'm going to go back to the book of Daniel. I'm going to go back to chapter 11. I'm going to study it again with that in mind. Because I'm thinking, if this is true, when it talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, then if we are not dealing with symbols, we must think geographic north and geographic south, because we are dealing with real-time symbols. So that's something that I just wanted to put out there for us to think about. But here's the other thing. Daniel chapter 12 is a continuation of chapter 11. If we are dealing with real time and not symbols, what does that tell you about what it says here in chapter 11? When it says, there shall be 1,290 days. What do you think about that time period? Can somebody unmute and say something?
Literal.
It makes sense that these time periods in Daniel 12 should be literal days, not symbolic.
3.5 years.
3.5, a little more than 3.5 years. Not 1260. A little over 3.5, 12,000, 1,290, and then you have the
Yeah, more time. Is that 45 days more?
Right. Then you have the 1335 afterwards, and so on. So anyway, we haven't come to this. We'll come to this later on, but this is a very strong reason to say that this is literal time. And I am happy for it, because most of the time when I was going through Daniel, I never had this idea in my mind. But it's very clear when you think about it. The fourth prophecy is not in symbols. You have to go back and look at those elements of the fourth prophecy and see if there are any symbolic elements there, because it's clearly a prophecy with literal elements. So that should be the primary approach that we take in this prophecy, in this fourth prophecy. Anyway, I just brought that in, but I wanted to point out that this abomination of desolation being set up here in Daniel 12, this, I believe, is a final application of the abomination of desolation. This is the antitype of what happened in Jerusalem. This is the final warning to God's people. But we need to look at it more closely to give that a little bit more details, but I just wanted to point that out. And the final place where it comes up is in Daniel 11 and verse 31. And I have to admit, I have to go and look at this a little bit more closely too. I think this has to do with the same dark ages. But again, it says, and arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Now, it's very clear that this is not talking
in the
about
computer. Marnap.
It's very clear that this is not talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. So you know, it says clearly that whoever the he is, or the they shall take away the daily, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. It's interpreted differently from what we see in Daniel 9, but the same terminology is there. So I just wanted to point this out, because as we continue studying in Daniel chapter 11 and 12, we are going to be looking at this abomination of desolation more closely. But I wanted to make that clear this evening. All right. This just about brings us to the end of our time for this evening. So what I'm going to do, instead of starting on something else, I'm going to stop and we're going to have a discussion if there are any questions or any points that need further clarification. I'm going to open the room for any questions or points.
I have a question, David.
Yes, Brother Ray.
Um, I've been based on what I've been studying about Rome, the history of Rome. I've been studying these past couple of days. I understand that Rome, when the United States was, first started rising up, it came from people from Europe, you know, and they all brought the vestiges of Rome. So I'm wondering, the beast right now, Rome itself, it's sitting in the United States. In other words, the abomination, desolation, could it be that this country here is Rome is camouflaging itself, running this country here? Because if you look at Rome, you look at their structures when they had their senators and everything, everything is a duplication over here in the United States. So we know that the beast comes from the bottomless pit, and which means atheism and whatnot. And this is where this country is leading. Could it be that this place here, America, is the one that is talking about the abomination of desolation? Because right now, Europe is the one that's in America. And we're thinking about Europe over there. But Europe is the one that's controlling America from here. They're going to make the image to all the other countries in Europe as well. I mean, I'm taking the history and comparing it with what we're learning here.
Yeah, we can say that Roman culture and Greek culture are prominent in the United States. But when we talk about the prophecies, we have to kind of keep the same distinctions that the prophecy makes. Now, the prophecy teaches that there is a European beast and there's an American beast, unless we are very, very wrong. But the second beast is supposed to represent the United States, and the first beast is supposed to represent the European power. So to say that the European power is in America, it may be true in a sense, but in the prophecy, it is not presented in that way. In the prophecy, America is the two-horned beast and Europe is the other beast, the European power. So in interpreting the prophecies, we must keep this distinction. Otherwise, we are going to get confused about what the prophecies mean. This is why when people say that the beast from the bottomless pit is a new world order, I have a problem. When they say it's the United Nations, I have a problem. Do you know why? Because America is in the United Nations. America is in the New World Order. But if you look at the prophecy, America is a two-horned beast. It's not the other beast. While the other beast is there with the 7 heads and 10 horns, America is a separate power called the false prophet. They are both there right up to the end. So you can't make the beast the New World Order, because otherwise you'd have to say America is not a part of the New World Order. You can't say the beast is the United Nations, then you'd have to say America is not a part of the United Nations. So as long as America is a separate entity, that beast cannot be the New World Order, and that beast cannot be the United Nations. That is what I have. These are reservations I have, because for me, I have to base my understanding upon what I'm seeing in the prophecies. That's what I'm looking at. And if there is some major problem in the way I'm understanding it, then I'm totally wrong. But you know, I would need to see that reason for believing America is not the two-horned beast, the other beast is not the European power. Then everything falls apart. But as long as we keep those two things, then certain things have to remain, that they are out of the question. And one of them is, I agree that American culture, maybe European culture, European maybe even the religion from ancient Greece and the culture and so on is in America. That is not in question. But in terms of the work of the beasts, America is different from Europe. Even if they are friends and they overlap and they visit each other and they spend time together and they influence each other, but they are two different powers.
Okay.
David.
Yes, Brother Ayayi.
Okay, yeah, you just made a statement about the test that will come upon the whole world, and in relationship to the mark of the beast. And you said that it can be a test to people if they don't really know. Well, I agree with that in a sense, but at the same time, I disagree with that. Because when we go back to Babylon, when we look at the
Somebody stop, Brother David.
David, your camera's on.
Brother David.
David Feinstock, your camera's on.
Oh no, he
Yeah,
can't
I
hear.
don't think you can hear us.
Can you turn off his camera?
I can dismiss him, but I can't turn off his camera.
Oh, well, dismiss the brother.
Uh-oh. Brother David. Brother
Oh, there we
David.
go. Okay, I took him out of the room. Sorry, I had to do that. I hope you'll
Yes.
understand.
Oh, can you please do it sooner than later?
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Brother IAE.
Okay, yeah, I'm saying that when we go back to the mark, okay, the beast, the worship of the beast in Babylon, for the Babylonians, it wasn't a test. It wasn't a test for them because they were already with the beast. It was only a test for those who did not belong to the beast. So is in that is where I'm saying that in the last days also we cannot expect, when it comes down to the worship of the beast, the image of the beast, we cannot expect that it's going to be a test for everybody, because for some people who are already with the beast, it's not going to be a test. It's going to be a test only for people who were not with the beast. I mean, for Christians. So, and this is going to make it a little bit more like to see, actually, for Christians to show people's character is what is going to happen, to show people's character, those who said we are Christians. And I think it's going to be more likely a test for them, because everybody is going to church, everybody is saying I'm a Christian, but when the tests come, then the test is going to reveal who is really following Christ or not. That's the point I want to make.
Thank you, Brother IAE. And again, like you, I'm going to agree with you and then disagree. Okay. And I will give you my reasons. I think that when it comes to a type and the antitype, one of the things we know is that the antitype is usually extremely inferior to the type is usually very inferior to the antitype. The elements are a little different. And in this case, I'm going to demonstrate that it is so. The mark of the beast crisis comes in a certain context. The situation on the plain of Dura in Babylon was a microcosm. It was a minor event which was demonstrating certain things on a limited level. But the mark of the beast, the Bible says it is to try those who dwell on the earth. And it's in a certain context, because Jesus said something. He says, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations. And then when it comes to Revelation chapter 14, it says, the angel flies in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. In other words, the mark of the beast comes in the context of the entire planet being lightened with the glory of God. It's not just the church. It's not just a message for Christians. It is the entire planet lightened with the glory of God. And if you ask why, it's because this is the only time in the history of the universe, the only time that everybody on the planet is going to be judged. It's the only time. Judgment came upon Sodom. Judgment came upon the antediluvian world in a typical way, right? It wasn't real. It wasn't really a separation of sheep from goats in a spiritual sense. It was a physical test of whether of who's going to the ark. But in this case, it's the gospel coming face to face with everybody on the planet, because God is saying, I'm about to bring things to a close, and I'll never end the plan of salvation without every person having an opportunity. That's what God is saying. The whole reason why, or one of the main reasons why the coming of Jesus has been delayed, is because there has always been a generation that does not know. They have never been given an opportunity. When he comes, the planet will know. And so this is why I'm saying that the mark of the beast, when it divides the world into two groups, it will be in the context of a planet where everybody has had an opportunity to make a decision. What you say is true. Some people have already chosen Satan. Jesus never dealt with Judas that way. He didn't say, you already chose Satan, I'm not going to deal with you. No. He knew who Judas had chosen, but he still dealt with Judas, because God is not dealing with things in a secretive way. His judgment is before the universe, that everybody can say God is fair. When an atheist rejects God and chooses a mark of the beast, it will be because he had an opportunity to do otherwise. That is what the final work is about. This is why the earth is to be lightened with the glory of God. This is why I insist that the test cannot come in any secret way. Everybody will be enlightened, and they will understand that they are standing against God. Otherwise, it is not the test. It may be a test, but not the test. Sister Dad.
Brother Wayne brought this up, and I do have to ask, then what is the deception? Because in Revelation 19, it says that the false prophet and the beast deceit wrought miracles before whom they had deceived them to take the mark of the beast. And then Jesus warns us in Matthew 24 not to be deceived. So there is some deception to this, because it says that that the false prophet and the beast, those two entities, deceive them.
I absolutely agree. I mean, Paul says the same thing. Paul says, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they should be saved. For this cause, God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie. But you have to believe it is in the context of the final preaching of the gospel. They are brought face to face with the truth, and some deception makes them choose the lie.
Oh, okay, I get it.
So otherwise, how does God test the world if everybody doesn't have an opportunity to be faced with the gospel and to reject it? Because that's the whole point of the test. It's not just, it's a demonstration before the universe of God's justice and fairness, so that when he comes, there are no ambiguities and no questions. This final generation will be 144,000 versus the rest.
So really, it reminded me of the garden. Eve was deceived. Adam has the choice. He's not deceived, and he makes a choice.
Something like
You
that.
see, because she was deceived into doing what she did. Adam wasn't deceived. So there are two groups or two situations where one is deceived and one is not. So the people, you're right, if the people are deceived, it's because it's been put out there and then they believe the lie, because obviously deception is lying. And so then they believe the lie, whether it's the miracles, whether it's the whatever it is, they believe it. They believe what the world is telling them, and they take that, whatever it is. And that's how they get the mark.
one thing we can guarantee about the mark is that it has to be people's conscience have to be involved. All of us, before God, we stand or fall on the basis of our conscience. If it does not, if it does not affect a person's conscience, how does God deal with him? Even we Christians, I mean, the judgment, God knows everything. God knows everything. So the judgment is not for God's benefit, but there is a judgment. There is a judgment because the judgment is a demonstration of God's justice and God's fairness. That's what the judgment is about. The judgment is that God may demonstrate before the universe his fairness, that when Jesus comes, those who are taken out of this world, they have been demonstrated to be the people who have made a choice for God. And those who are left behind, it will be demonstrated that these people made a choice against God. God has to demonstrate his fairness. It's important to remember that the judgment is not on the basis of God getting information. It's on the basis of God demonstrating what is true. So everybody can see it. So that is why everybody needs to have an opportunity. I mean, that is as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the aspects of the final crisis. That is, it's something I can't see around it being any other way.
Brother
Brother
David.
David.
Hey, wait a minute, brother. I hear you. So the issue then has to be very clear as to what's going on. It can't, as you were saying, it can't be ambiguous. It has to be very clear. Then everybody has to make a decision on that issue, whatever that issue is.
Absolutely.
Small and great. Everybody will make a decision on this particular. So of course, Adventists have always said it's the Sabbath, but um, you know, I'm
I
not
mean,
going to go
the
there. But
Sabbath,
it has.
the Sabbath could be
Hmm.
a good issue to gravitate around. I don't have a problem with it, except that it's not what the prophecy says. That's my problem. It's not what the prophecy says. Plus, for the Sabbath to become the issue, it needs that gods go back to legalism. God goes back to the principle of being under the law, right? This is why I'm not pushing my point or pushing my idea. When it comes to prophecy, I recognize my limitations. When it comes to prophecy, if you believe differently from me, it's not an issue between us. So I hope
Hmm.
everybody understands that. I have ideas, and some of my ideas I feel very strongly about. But if we get wrong on the issue of salvation in Christ, it may be enough of a reason for me to say you go east and I go west. But where prophecy is concerned, I am as prone to mistakes as anybody else. But I believe I'm a good student of the prophecy. So I kind of value my opinion, even though I grant you I may very well be wrong. But what I'm saying is, this is why something like the gay movement, to me, it fits perfectly. But like I say, it's an opinion. Why does it fit perfectly? Because it's an issue that is black and white. No person with an honest conscience can say he thinks God accepts this. It's black and white. And yet, amazingly, in the churches and everywhere, people are not seeing it as black and white. They are taking black and making it white. Some issue like this that the whole world can see, to me, is going to be the mark of the beast. Something that everybody deliberately closes his mind against because it is convenient and it is easier. It has to be clear, black and white, that they know in their hearts that they are standing against God.
But see, brother, with this same issue, the children who are being taught this from early childhood now are being deceived into not knowing the difference. That's a problem because as adults, yes, we can make that decision and know the truth, but they're doing something with the children in these schools from very young. And I've heard parents say they've come in and found out the kinds of things that were taught in sixth grade to their children for sex ed that blew them away because it was so extensive. They, at that age, they didn't even need to know. So they've been programming children for so long. These poor children don't know. They believe what they're seeing is true. So that's deception on that part. They will be deceived into this. And then if their parents don't have good sense, then they're not going to be able to help them make a decision, a proper decision.
This is why I see your brother Bernard, and I think there was somebody before you. But this is why when it comes to a certain place, God says this is the last generation. When it comes to the place that the power to choose, when humanity reaches a place where they're about to take away the power of choice, because I mean, it will never reach that place. Why? Because as long as Christians remain, we are going to be preaching the message. Children are being educated. What are we doing? There can never be complete ignorance because we have a duty to present God to people, including children. So there will always be the conflict, and their response will be to wipe out Christianity. I believe it's one of the reasons why they're going to be trying to destroy Christianity and maybe even Babylon, because Babylon, some parts of Babylon may even take this position, which will add to their hatred of Babylon, why they will eventually destroy Babylon. But what I'm saying is, when it comes to this place that man threatens to take away the power of choice from people, God, that is God's time. And that is why we know we're at the end of time, because that's what they are trying to do. But they're not going to be allowed to get to that place. This is why we're in the last days. Somebody before Brother Bernard.
It was I, Brother David.
Yeah, Brother Peter.
Yeah. Do you think it is possible when the mark of the beast comes that there be litigation brought against it?
You mean like people might go to court and go check the Constitution and so on?
People going to court in order not to receive the mark of the beast.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there will be people who do that, because that's the way humanity operates. But you know, of course, when human beings make up their mind to do something a certain way, if it's popular and you have the masses of humanity behind it, it's nothing for people to change a law or adjust the Constitution. I mean, nothing will be able to stand against it if we believe the Bible.
Brother David.
Yes, brother.
The other question is before Brother I. If you should go to the law to litigate against receiving a mark of beast, could you in any way come out victorious?
I mean, if you believe the Bible, you can't. The only way you're going to become victorious is when Jesus comes to deliver us. But let me make Brother Bernard go before Brother Ayayi. Go ahead, Brother Bernard.
Yeah, I just wanted to, to make a comment really about the issue of the mark of the beast. And isn't the issue of the mark of the beast around worship? And therefore, could it be associated with the gay movement or the LGBT movement?
It revolves around worship. But again, it's in the book of Revelation where words don't mean what they say superficially. For example, it says, and they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. So clearly, if you take this literally, what it means is that they bow down and they say, "Hail Satan," and they pray to Satan, which is not what the scripture is saying at all. This is worship in the sense of giving your allegiance to somebody other than God. In the book of Revelation, I mean, when it talks about worship, they worship the beast. They worship the image of the beast. Worship, as we understand it, means genuflecting and giving praise and adoration and making petition. But clearly, in the Revelation, it means more submitting to the authority, giving this entity supreme authority in your life. So I think that's what it means more when it says that, you know, the mark has to do with worship. It has to do with giving supreme authority above God. Brother Ayayi, go ahead.
Yes, is a comment about the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is standing in contradiction to the seal of God, right? Yeah. So do we see the seal of God on people? I think no. Is a kind of behavior as Christians that we are in agreement with God, the nature of God. And it's why, for me, that when we say that people get the mark of the beast, it just looks again like, okay, all those movies they make, and you see people with sign, or they come to you and ask you, oh, do you want the mark of the beast or this and that? It's not going to be like that. When the Bible says that it causes both great and small, rich and poor, slave and free and bound, and I think this is going to be related to how those people behaved, their behavior, it becomes their nature. Actually, it's their nature, how they relate to God, or they relate to the beast, that the Bible says they have the mark of the beast, while the other side will have the seal of God. I think it's just something that's going to be printed in their nature, in their character, that they cannot depart from. That is what we are looking at here. So it's for me that everything that is pulling people away from God is why I am cautious to identify just one thing like this. Because when we say people will have the mark of the beast, it's like, okay, they make a choice, like, okay, here is the mark, I accept it. It's not going to be like that. Like Sister Diane said before, or the Bible says, is a great deception going on now, and people are even having the mark of the beast without knowing it. There is a deception, and the deception is much more for those who believe in God, in Christ. Like if we take the time of the disciples again, when Jesus said, if you see the abomination of desolation, those who were not disciples of Christ, they did not understand it. But those who were Christ's disciples, they understood it, and they left Jerusalem. So, and again, the mark of the beast right now, those people are accepting it. If we say it has something to do with the gay life, people are accepting it, they are deceived, and they are not with Christ, or because they have rejected already the love of the truth, then they will receive it.
Okay. All right. I see you, Brother Wayne. And thank you, Brother I. Here. I agree with you that ultimately, I mean, you won't see the mark, but you will see it in the behavior. But the idea of the mark or the seal being generally and gradually drifted into by people is where I would probably object, because when you look at the prophecy, this is what it says. Sometimes you have to look at the actual words to get an idea of the impact that God wanted to make on your mind. There are two things I want to point out. Number one, it is to be the test for the planet. It is the hour of temptation that shall come specifically to try those that dwell on the earth. That's the purpose of it. It's not just to kind of generally see who is where. It's to test people and to prove who is where. Secondly, it says, and he causeth all to receive a certain mark. It's very specific when it says a certain mark. So, I mean, it can't be that you are just an atheist and you are just a gay person and you are just involved in this, and then in a general way you all have the mark because you all have negativity towards God. When it says a certain mark, it's the Bible, the words are focusing on something specific. In other words, there's a particular issue. People might be drifting one way or the other, but a particular issue brings everything to a crisis. That's the whole point of it. God wants everything to come to a crisis, because it's not just that Satan is trying to take over the planet, but it's also God's purpose to bring everything to a crisis, because a crisis is the only place you can demonstrate what is in people. There has to be a crisis. And so it's not a general crisis, because you have had general crises all through the ages. It's a crisis that God specifically facilitates. Let me put it that way. God facilitates this crisis because it is to be the great test that will divide the world into two groups. So it has to have those characteristics of something specific. What is evident is that it will be of such a nature that it gives people room to go either direction. If you can look at Jesus Christ as an example, everything said Jesus was the Son of God, but not everything, because some of the prophecies didn't say it, right? Some of the prophecies looked for a conquering Messiah, a great person, and so there was enough ambiguity for people to say this is not the Messiah, and so people were free to make a choice where their heart was going. So the great majority didn't choose Christ, and somebody would say, you know, there were reasons, there were reasons, this and that, but ultimately it was that God brought the planet, God brought the world to the cross. God brought the world to the cross. Everybody who lived in that time and who had eyes to see, they came to the cross, and it was clear, and they didn't see because they rejected what God's Spirit was telling them. And so it's easy for me to understand how something can be black and white and 90% of the world turns against God, because it demonstrates what is in the heart. It's not what is in the heart that is in this test. The issue is not what is in your heart. The issue is what is demonstrated about your heart, because remember, it's a demonstration. The issue is a demonstration. What is in your heart was always there. And what is in your heart, you're going to be lost or saved. God knows already who's going to be lost or saved. But the crisis is a demonstration. So it has to be something that brings you to the place where you demonstrate it. That is how I see it, you know. I want to say something. I see your brother Wayne, brother Bernard. All right, Wayne, and then brother Bernard, and then I'll say something. I don't want the evening to pass without me saying it. So go ahead, brother Wayne.
Right, thank you. I just thought still on the mark of the beast is there, the mark. I just thought in Matthew, sorry, not Matthew, in Revelation rather, you know, it says that some shall receive the mark in their forehead and some in their hands, right? And then it says in Revelation 19:20 that the beast was taken with him, the false prophet, and the beast and the false prophets, which did miracle and deceived those who received the mark. You know, when I heard about, when I was taught about those receive it in their forehead, has done so intelligently. They knew what they were doing. They accepted it. Those who receive it in their hands are those who were the ones probably tricked into it, or accepted it because, you know, it is all the only way they would be able to live. They'll get carried on with their livelihood. How do we? But yes, still one verse says it's a deception. And is it that the one that received the mark in the forehead in their hand, is that not the true understanding that there's no intelligent approach to this, to accepting it? Or is it that all of them were just deceived, or is it that I'm not understanding what it means by they were deceived?
Let me use an illustration to kind of clarify that point. Do you believe that any of those who rejected Christ were deceived? I want you to consider the question. Do you believe that any of those who rejected Christ were deceived?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. That was an open question, not just to me. Okay.
Yeah, man, it was open. But anyway, right. But I says yes, and I think that you would say yes as well. A lot of people rejected Christ. Most of the people of Jerusalem rejected him. Those who were gathered there rejected him. And you would say some of them were deceived, right? And they were deceived by the lies of the leaders and the connivings of the leaders. But they were deceived. When you are deceived, you have evidence to the contrary. You have truth to prevent you from being deceived. Why are you deceived? Because you receive not the love of the truth. They wanted a different kind of Messiah. They wanted the safety of their nation. They wanted the approval of their leaders, and so they were ripe for deception. And that's how I look at the deception of the beast. People have evidence. Whatever these miracles are, we could discuss what kind of miracles, but whatever they are, why do they deceive people? Because they never heard the truth, or because they had no opportunity? No, they learned the truth, they heard the truth, they are exposed to the truth, but they are deceived because it is where their heart is. Deception is just one more tool that Satan adds to the arsenal of keeping people where they want to be. We are not to suppose that people are deceived against their will, or against their better judgment, or because they have no opportunity. No, you can't be deceived in that way. You are deceived because you have the opportunity, you see the truth, and you choose to believe the lie because your heart is taking you where you really belong. Go ahead, Brother Bernard.
Yes, I know that you said that you wouldn't discount it being linked to the Sabbath, the mark of the beast. And you see that there's a push, with the climate change issue, a push for Sunday rest. You see in the Pope's Laudato Si, you see all these things pushing to some sort of day of rest being on a Sunday. So I just think that maybe we shouldn't just totally discount that as being a possible link to that being the mark of the beast.
As I said, for me, I don't set anything in stone, but I think there's a very good reason why I would think that the way we arrive at the conclusion that it has to do with the Sabbath is something that I discount. I discount the method by which we arrive there, because it made sense when I used to believe that the papacy was the beast. Remember that we arrive at Sabbath Sunday because we say Sunday worship is the mark of the papacy. That's how we arrive there. And it's the mark of the papacy, and the papacy is the beast. Now you go to the prophecies and you discover the papacy is not the beast. The papacy, you can't have the woman riding the beast, and the beast destroys the woman, and the beast is a papacy, and the woman is a papal church. That is a discrepancy that makes no sense. The beast doesn't destroy the religious side of the beast. No. So once you come to this conclusion that the woman rides the beast, but she's not the beast, and the beast turns around and destroys her at the end, then you have to ask, who is the beast? And then now the mark of the beast becomes a different thing, because the mark relates to the beast, not the woman. So this is the reason why the Sabbath is an issue that the Sabbath being the mark of the beast is something that it doesn't make sense to me based on how we come to that conclusion.